you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here and to talk to you all about some of the work that I do and some of the work that we do at the Museum of Natural History, both at the museum and then connecting to a lot of different networks. Um, I so a lot of my career has been really focused on this idea that when scientists work with young people and learn how to be really thoughtful, intentional, effective mentors, it's so incredibly powerful both for the youth that they work with, but also for the scientists themselves and for the field of science. I really think that this is one of the ways that we can transform and improve the culture of science across all of our institutions is to bring youth into the space a bit more and to learn how to work with youth. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about my path in science outreach and education, with some examples from my work at the Museum of Natural History, working with youth and working with scientists. And then the consortium, the network that Denise just mentioned, the New York City Science Research Mentoring Consortium, where we really connect and convene program managers who are often the connectors of youth and the scientists, researchers. And I wanted to then bring in a little bit some of our work that we've done. Last year, we hosted a conference for science research mentoring programs where we really are trying to get at the deeper issues and the deeper possibilities around creating really effective mentorship in these spaces. So, my background is in ecology and evolutionary biology. I know that many of the people in the audience here are from more of that neurobiology, neuroscience space, but I think there's also a lot of really cool overlaps. So, just a little bit about my path. So, I grew up mostly in Michigan with a little bit in Greece. Here's a picture of me at Mackinac Island in Michigan. People don't always know how gorgeous Michigan is, but it is. Yeah. Um, I went to I went to college at the University of Rochester where I majored in biology, and at Rochester, they had an ecology and evolution subtrack within biology, and I minored in cultural anthropology. So I was really drawn to both the science and the people, the social groups and the social structures. So I worked at the City College of New York first for a couple years as a lab tech and lab manager, but then did my PhD there, and I'll tell you a little bit about my work there with lizards in Brazil. And for the last 8 years or so, I've been at the American Museum of Natural History in a couple different roles over the years, but always with the same programs and with the same like corner and little bubble within that work. And just to mention briefly that I also currently am an adjunct professor at Columbia University, so I know that in talking with the organizers, you are also interested in just sharing a little bit about like the multiple different things you can do in outreach and patching different things together. So um, I can say that it's definitely possible to stay with a foot in the door in academic institutions, even when you move away a little bit into these other spaces. Um, so I did my PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology at CUNY, the City University of New York. And that work was really all about lizards. I studied a group of lizards in Brazil. So I worked in the Atlantic forest of Brazil, and I was really interested in climate impacts on these animals. So I spent a lot of time out in the mountains putting down traps and looking for lizards. Um, and then I spent a lot of time looking at microhabitats and climate. Did a ton of thermal physiology experiments. So that's that angry lizard biting my finger, where we collected lizards out in the wild and then did some temperature tolerance and temperature optimum experiments with them, merged that with some phylogenomics and phylogeography, really to try and understand how climate in the past and in the present have interacted with their evolutionary history. How has it shaped where they live, where they don't live, and how they're related to each other? So I really loved doing this work. And at the same time, I didn't think that I wanted to do it forever. And I found myself kind of continually being drawn to different outreach, advocacy, and education experiences as a PhD student. So I was always like, organization had like a one-off outreach event, I would try and get there because it was just fun to interact with students. One thing I didn't mention was that before I started my PhD, I was doing both. I was working as a lab tech in a molecular ecology lab, but at the same time teaching in after school. And I really loved that balance. And I found that while I was really focused on research, I was missing these other things. So I kept trying to seek those out. Um, and I think one of the things that I learned from that was that, well, this is obviously important to me. I keep looking for it. And then when I got involved with some more like somewhat more formal organizations or more like a more formal role in some organizations, I learned some new skills around outreach and advocacy as well. So for several years, I was a chair of the New York City chapter for 500 women scientists. And I was really inspired by their mission, which is to serve society by making science open, inclusive, and accessible by fighting racism, patriarchy, and oppressive societal norms. So in that role, I helped organize and led the organization of a lot of different events. This picture is from a book club and book talk with there's the author in the back, Angela Saini of this book, Superior, that we were really excited that were able to get her. But through that role, I really got into a little bit more of the logistical space. How do we make this happen? How do we make events, come off the page and into a room with a bunch of strangers together? I also was very involved with the City College Women in Science group. I was part of the group that founded that organization while I was a grad student, and then while I was there, I also started the a Women in Science mentoring program at the college. So that was where undergrads were paired with grad students to talk once a month about whatever they needed to talk about. We had some prompts that we sent out every month, and that grad students were then paired with either senior postdocs or faculty members. So we had a multi-tiered mentoring system. Um, and so with this, I really got more comfortable with supervising people, and I got more comfortable with supervising other volunteers. We were all volunteers in all of these different organizations, and that's a little bit of it requires a different approach than when you are supervising somebody that like officially reports to you. And so through that, I really learned some skills around this idea of leading from the middle. We're all volunteers here. We're all really doing the same work, but I want to keep pushing it forward. And so I mentioned that because this was, I think, a space where I really started to figure out what it was that I wanted to be doing and how I wanted to be doing it. So this is, I can't remember if somebody said this to me or if I like patched it together from things that multiple people said to me, but this idea of a way to like figure out your next steps being to pay attention to what you enjoy and also what you care about and then find ways to get better at doing that was really how I approached this time of like, okay, I clearly am keep being drawn to these different aspects, these different experiences, and I care about making science equitable and accessible, and I care about equity and accessibility beyond science as well. And so let me find ways not only to do that more, but to learn some skills that will help me do that better. Which ultimately then when I finished that PhD, I um, found a job and I was offered a job at the American Museum of Natural History um, in their in the education department, specifically in youth initiatives, which is a bubble within education, and specifically with our science research mentoring program. Um, so that work, well, just to tell you a little bit about youth initiatives in education. So, American Museum of Natural History is an incredibly large institution with lots of different things going on. It's got a lot of parallels to universities and other academic institutions, and it's got a lot of differences. One of the things that I really love about being at a museum is that we have both really in-depth science research happening and a very well developed education division. So youth initiatives is one bubble within that, and it's really about our middle school, high school, and college youth. So just some examples of what we do in that group is that We host and run after school and summer courses for middle school students throughout the year. We have a program that's a 6-year intensive where students come from 7th grade all the way through 12th grade. So they're with us for the entire 6 years, getting a whole different host of experiences, classes and internships and all kinds of stuff. We now, in the last couple of years, we've had these paid micro internships for high school students. So we're working really closely with the New York City school system, um, where students from a school come together right after school and they are in this 6-week or 8-week experience that they're actually paid to learn how to do different skills. So right now there's one that's, we call it enhancing, which is enhancing the museum exhibits digitally. So they're learning the digital skills, but also learning the communication and the museum kind of landscape. We have paid internships for science communication for both high school and college students, where they learn how to interact with visitors on the floor. And then we have this paid mentored science research program for high school students, which is the program that I first started at the museum in. So all of that is to say that there are so many ways that we do science education for young people and so many different opportunities and models of programs for different ages and different um, interests as well. So at the museum, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the science research mentoring program. So this is the paid experience for high school students. And really, the goal here is to increase access to science fields and careers for New York City high school students by providing authentic science research opportunities and meaningful mentorship. And it's guided by these underlying values and beliefs. So, one is that all young people can thrive in science. Another is that conducting high quality research while in high school broadens scholars' career options and increases opportunities for success long term. And then also that science is more effective and meaningful as a community. So one of the reasons that we make this all really explicit is that, one of those things that I learned when I was working with volunteers and trying that leading from the middle piece is that one of the most effective ways to get people to kind of be on the same page is to make sure it's really clear what that page is. What is the value? What's the goal of this? What are our grounding beliefs? And then let's make sure that everything we do in this program builds on those. Or if we're seeing discrepancies, let's go back and reevaluate if our grounding beliefs are still the same that they were maybe 10 years ago. These have changed in the last 10 years, right? Um, but this is a program where high school students spend a year with us at the museum. Um, and they start in August, they graduate in June. They spend the first month in a intensive summer institute. And then September through May, they come in 2 to 3 times a week after school and they work with their assigned mentor. So every student is in a group of usually it's 3 high school students with 1 scientist mentor, and that little group works together for the entire year. And the students work on a project that's relevant to the mentor's field. So the mentors are usually sometimes they're graduate students. Our most like the biggest bucket is postdocs. And then sometimes there are people who are more like established or not established, but like more permanent roles. They're researchers and they've been there for a long time. That's their role as at the museum. Um, so our students work on projects from astrophysics, anthropology, conservation biology, genetics, genomics, all the things that we have at the museum and we have researchers doing at the museum. We have students in the program doing that work. And then at the end, they present big posters, etc. And this is something we do as part of our bigger network as well. I put a picture up here of Fernando. This is Fernando Melendez Vasquez. I mentioned that I started at the museum working in this program. I now am still very connected to this program, but Fernando is our manager of this program now, and so he is leading the day-to-day technicalities. But we're still, really always trying to make sure that they're connected to our big values and our big grounding principles as well. So importantly, this is a paid program, and that is important for a lot of reasons. One is that it really values the students' work. It's showing that we think that this is important and that they're doing something that's not only valuable for their own lives, but they're actually doing something good for the mentors and they're doing something good for the institution as well. Some of that is like sometimes they publish, sometimes they don't. They're generating real data that's meant to be an authentic project. Um, but also it's valuable time, for them, and they are often making trade-offs, if you do this intensive program, you're probably not gonna be able to take a big or, like, take a lot of hours at your part-time job if earning money is important to you and your family, which it is for most people. Um, so that's a little bit about the way that this particular program works. Um, we start, as I mentioned, with the Summer Institute. They have most of their time is spent on the research, 2 hours twice a week. And that twice a month, the whole group, we have 60 students overall, and the whole group comes together for workshops about career exploration, science communication, um, and equity in STEM. So we have a series of workshops that's all about social responsibility in STEM, history of STEM, identity, and all of those different aspects as well that we feel are really essential to making sure that one, people know that there's a space for them in science, and two, if they want to go into a science field, that they're prepared to be responsible members of that community. One of the things that I've really just always been struck by in doing this work is that teens are so incredibly capable. Um, these are teenagers who we recruit students who are new to science, and haven't done any kind of science research before. They're not coming from this as like, oh, I've whatever done a million um, competitions and I want to go deeper. This is mostly people who are trying something new, or at least trying it at a new intensity. And it's just phenomenal that with, like, all of the with support and compassionate mentorship, they can just do so many incredible things. I mean, I don't know what other time in our lives are we, like, going from a physics class to immediately switching to think about English literature to then, having fun with friends and then going to soccer practice and then, like, getting deep into a scientific research question, and they're pulling from all of those experiences, right? In the scientific research, they're still thinking about that physics class. They're making connections to the thing that they were talking about in English class. It's just, like, all in a single day. It's just so, upfront that it's really fun to hear and to learn from the connections that they're making. Um, and then the other side of it is that this is so and can be so powerful for the scientists. When I first started in this role, I was mentoring high school students directly as well, for several years in these little projects about lizards in my case. But we also know from everybody else, and we know from research that we've done and others have done, that the mentors, the scientists in these spaces are learning and growing so much. We've just anecdotally had so many mentors come back to us and say that when they started a research lab, they worked with us as a postdoc, and when they started a research lab, they had these skills, right? They knew how to supervise people in a way that other new faculty didn't, because mentoring in a small group is very different from teaching as a teaching assistant, for example. We've had people who left this program and started similar programs elsewhere. So they saw the value of it. And we've also just seen individual people who are asking different questions and using this as an experience to explore a different side of their science that maybe isn't quite as like sure bet to publish, but was kind of an interesting side project for them. And so that's another huge value for the scientists as well. So one of the things about this is that, this is an example of this sort of youth mentorship program happening at a museum, and a museum is certainly not the only place where this can happen, and it's actually pretty unusual for it to happen at museums. Um, but that's one of the ways that this science research mentoring consortium comes in. So we oversee this network of it's now about 30 programs all across New York City, all of whom provide paid, mentored research experiences for high school students. So we come together to share a lot of ideas, to keep each other accountable, and to do some events and some kind of big picture things together. Because that science research, the impact of the science research mentorship really shouldn't be limited to just one institution. The story is that about 12 or 13 years ago, before I was part of the team, the science research mentoring program was working, and the funder really liked it and said, "Hey, can you take, can you double the number of students you can take?" And at the time, people said no. But then they figured out a way to work with other institutions that were either interested in doing similar things or had already started doing similar things. Um, so the way this is really structured is that all of these individual programs run independently, but they all are committed to a shared set of guiding principles. So this is a partnership of academic, research, and cultural institutions committed to providing these dynamic mentored science research experiences. And again, the mission, I think it's important to always to ground these experiences and programs in their mission. The mission of this network is to provide students from historically underrepresented backgrounds in STEM access to innovative paid research internships that support them in their college and career pathways. So I've included a picture here of Arden File, who is our consortium manager at this time. Um, so here are the guiding principles. So every single program in this network has committed to all of these things. So one is a commitment to increasing racial, socioeconomic, and gender diversity, a commitment to building and sustaining community, providing scaffolded support. So in our example, that's like the summer prep experience before students start doing research. And then a huge commitment and dedication to authentic engagement over time, where students work with mentors for at least 100 hours. One thing that I love that we have as a guiding principle is mentor preparation, um, because it's not easy to be a mentor, and it's something that many of us never learned how to do in a formal sense. The other guiding principle here is compensation, that youth and labs or mentors are compensated and paid to participate in one way or another. Um, so in this network, this community of practice, we host events for the youth researchers. We have alumni resources, and we do research about alumni pathways across the whole network, which is much more powerful than like any one smaller program on its own. Um, Representatives from these different programs commit to attending consortium meetings and actively participate in that community of practice, and that programs commit to incorporating all those guiding principles. And so that means that all mentors in this network need to attend and participate in a mentorship workshop. So then we also share resources, we share data, we share insights across the network throughout. Um, and just a quick example of that, especially, I mean, I'm thinking about the mentorship side. We compile resources from across the entire network, and we also create some new resources. So one example is that mentorship workshop. So these are just very briefly some little blips from a mentorship workshop that we provide, that we have created and share all the materials across the network, and sometimes host workshops for people's mentors. Um, just an example of like, let's make sure that all of your mentors are thinking about this. Let's make sure that they have a real concrete project. They've thought about building relationships. They've thought about giving feedback. They've thought about what they need to communicate with their young people who are likely brand new in a science research space. And then we go through some case studies. And so we've got a whole workshop, and these are materials that I'm not posting publicly at this point because we're thinking about our own publication strategy, but I am happy to connect with anybody and share them directly for your use. Um, but just an example of some of the tips that we give at the end of that workshop after we've discussed all of these different aspects. One of the things about this community of practice, so we are all so focused on this idea that um, when we work with youth, it's good for everyone. And also, we have this idea and this belief and this value that when we work together, it's good for everyone, that us independently running parallel or similar programs is great because more students get to experience that, but there's so much that we can share and so much that we can kind of amplify when we do it in a bigger group. So we've been looking at this community participation model from the Center for Scientific Collaboration and Community Engagement as a way that helps us think about how we want to structure this community practice and where we want to move into. So this consortium has now been in existence for about 12 years. And over the years, we really have seen it shift from this convey and consume model of like the Museum of Natural History shared materials, shared ideas, shared information, to then asking other people in the network in the early years to collaborate, to contribute, bringing in materials. Over the last several years, we've become much more collaborative, which is that people work together. This program and that program are doing a little thing and maybe bringing it back to the whole group. Um, we have been shifting more and more into this co-create and transformative um, model of community where there's more mutual sharing, there's more integration and synthesis and taking ideas from one place to another that's not always coming through the middle hub, but more intergroup connections. And we've seen that very powerfully in our youth recruitment work. So we now have a small group that's like really super focused on youth recruitment and thinking about what practices do they do that other programs can also do, and how can we create new structures together, not just share the existing materials. Um, so yeah, I think that we really we really need to be um, and it's really powerful when we work together on these things, and we really need to be intentional about it, not only in the ways that we work with our youth and what we do in our mentorship directly with youth, but also how we work with each other. Because one thing that I've been finding is also like people are desperate to work together, right? The people are very, very interested in collaboration in this field, which I absolutely love. And so let's find more ways to do that. Um, so the last kind of chunk of things I wanted to share with you is one way that we are doing that and thinking about more expansive collaboration. So last spring, we hosted this new conference. We called it Shrimp Con because we call our science research mentoring program Shrimp. Um, and so this was Shrimp Con. One of the people I work with was like really intent on modeling it, at least the name, after Comic Con. It had nothing to do with Comic Con, but we called it Shrimp Con anyway. Anyway, we were bringing together leaders of high school science research mentoring programs. So we put out a call for programs across the country that do similar kind of work. So we were intentional and pretty narrow about the kinds of programs that were invited. So we wanted places where science researchers were the direct mentors. We wanted programs that were either free or provide monetary stipends. Um, we wanted programs that were pretty well established and had specific goals and structures. So it was a very, they had something to work with. And we then had a 3-session thing. So a virtual session where we got together to identify some of the things that we were all thinking about and concerned about and working, challenges that we were working with. Then we met in New York City for 3 days to do a lot of stuff. And then at the end, we had a little bit of a wrap up. We're now having a lot of conversations about what happens next with this. This was an NSF grant that was terminated towards the very dramatically, honestly, at the very last day of the conference. But so now we're thinking about like, where do we go from here? But I do want to tell you about some of the things that we were doing there because the big goal here was to enable effective mentorship for youth in STEM research settings, with the idea that together, when we pull all of these different resources and brains and ideas, we can change how programs and institutions operate when it comes to youth STEM research mentoring. So our structure was really about understanding the system within that big challenge. What are the different causes leading to those challenges? What can individual programs do to address that? And then thinking collectively, okay, if we're all in the room together, what can we do to make those particular program practices easier to implement? And then let's launch. Let's go big with all of this and figure out how to implement these ideas across institutions. So, we threw a lot of ideas at the board to begin with. We started with this question: what are the barriers to enabling effective mentorship in STEM institutions? And we separated them into a lot of different categories. So there are policies, there's the environment, there's metrics, there's I don't know what the other things are. There's a lot of things. We then organized all of those ideas and figured out and realized really that we were looking at a couple different big picture challenges. Um, we used some tools from system science and improvement science to organize all of these ideas. So specifically, we did this fishbone exercise where this was new to me. So I really loved learning more about this and found it a very useful way to organize the ideas in my brain. But essentially, we realized that we had a couple different specific challenges that we were talking about, and that each one of those challenges had a lot of different causes that had kind of big picture causes and then smaller subcomponents of what was creating that challenge or what was influencing that challenge. So, for example, one of them was around mentor recruitment. A big challenge that all of these programs found is that many scientists and researchers don't sign up to serve as mentors for youth in these programs. Um, and we think that's for a lot of different reasons. So these things at the top are the bigger picture. So some things that kept coming up were that researchers don't know the impact of youth mentorship. They don't realize how important it is. And that's one reason that they're not signing up. They don't believe that they personally benefit from doing it. There's a lot of pressure to publish, and that takes time away, and doing youth education work takes time away from that. And then very big picture, in many places, researchers are not encouraged to serve as mentors by their institutional leadership. So we broke those down into all of these like sub components of different reasons that these things might be happening or that we've seen them happen or reasons that we've seen for this. Um, and then the other big fish that we identified was mentorship quality. So even in cases where we do have mentors signing up, they're not always providing effective mentorship for youth. And it's very rarely that they don't want to. It's much more often there's other things happening. They want to be good mentors, but for all these reasons, they're not always. So some of the big categories there are that maybe staff in these programs provide minimal oversight on mentorship quality. Mentors don't have training. Mentors they don't provide the appropriate guidance for youth, or they don't create welcoming environments. And so there are a lot of reasons that all of those things might be happening as well. So our goal here was to really understand what's happening in the field of what's happening in all of these kinds of programs, but also really why. Why are they not providing effective mentorship? Because like I said, it's usually not because people don't care. It's because, they didn't go to the training. Well, why didn't they go to the training? They had other things to do. They don't get paid for the trainings, whatever. There's a kind of a cascade or whatever, maybe cascade of reasons. So we were really intent on then finding solutions for these things. So I'm gonna fly through some of the tools that we used for deciding on solutions, and picking actions to work on. So another diagram, another tool that we used from improvement science, and I should mention that I learned all of these things through participation in a network called STEM Push, which is a national network of pre-college STEM programs. Um, and they were really helpful in developing the plan for this conference as well. But essentially, if we look at mentor recruitment, okay, those were all the problems and the reasons that it doesn't work. What do we actually want to happen? Well, we want to recruit scientists to serve as mentors for youth research. Um, okay, based on what we just learned from our fishbone diagram of why that's not happening, what do we actually want to happen? Well, we want to make sure one thing is we want to make sure that researchers do understand and value the impact of youth mentorship. Cool, great idea. How? A couple possibilities are you could communicate the impact to mentors directly. Um, you could also initiate new research about the impact of youth STEM mentorship, because there's some, but there's not a ton. Okay, great ideas. How? So then we got into the program practices of what either do programs already do or what could they do. So an idea for that is, there is research out there, but the neuroscientists aren't usually reading the youth education journals. So we could create research summaries to bridge that those two worlds a little bit. We can also share more anecdotal personal stories from our alumni during mentor recruitment efforts. We could start new studies. These are some things that individual programs can do that will ultimately lead back into and hopefully help recruit more scientists to serve as mentors. So we did this across the whole thing. So this is also stuff that we're figuring out our own how we want to disseminate this more broadly. But be happy to chat more with people if this is your thing. Um, but yeah, so for mentor recruitment, the big things that we identified as potential, the way that the STEM push team often talks about this is what are the levers that we can push that would have the most impact? So based on what we know about the problem, we think that if researchers understand and value the impact, they understand the impact that it can have on their own careers, they view youth mentorship as beneficial, and they're encouraged to serve as mentors by institutional leadership, that can have a really positive impact on mentor recruitment. And then here are some ways that we could do it. Um, in the conference, we took that one step further to say, okay, great, we're all in the room together with these ideas. How can we make those particular program practices more possible? Let's use our expertise and our collaboration to do something that can benefit not only our individual program, but can help these other programs as well. So people started working on things um, let me find one that people were doing. Oh, here, people started working on a product to generate scientist profiles showing how being a mentor helped that scientist's own career. So people are pulling from different program examples to make a combined product that will hopefully then help everybody with that particular lever that will show mentors how it can advance their own careers, ultimately leading them to recruit more mentors. We did the same thing for the mentorship quality. I'll just show you the images in case you're curious. But a big thing is these workshops. People don't go to workshops because they have other things to do. So how can we establish better incentives to go to workshops? Sometimes people pay them. That costs money. What else can you do? So we were brainstorming some ideas there. One is pursue funding, and if there's no funding available in the current year where you're working, as has been the case recently, we talked about and started thinking about writing a paper on why it is so essential to pay mentors, and then you can use that when funding opportunities do arise. Um, and other examples kind of in that vein. So really thinking about what are the actual challenges that we're working with here around mentorship, and let's create solutions, let's create actions that are directly tied to the objectives we want, because very often, we're a little bit scattered. We're doing a lot of different things and we try new things. We try new practices, new protocols, new ideas without really knowing how it's ultimately connected to the big objective. So I really loved these tools for that purpose. I'd be very curious to hear also from this audience if these are challenges that you all are facing or have experienced with as well. We do anticipate more coming soon out of this shrimp con work. We have been packaging up the products that everybody worked on at the conference and are thinking about ways to share that broadly. This over here on the side is our conference committee. So then finally, just some takeaways um, that I think about with this kind of work is that again, when scientists work with young people and learn how to be thoughtful mentors, it's better for everybody. It's better for the youth, and it's definitely makes science a more accessible and welcoming, effective space. Youth are so incredibly capable. I think that we don't really value the youth perspective in a lot of fields as much as maybe we should because they can help us solve big problems and think about things creatively in just like ways that, I never thought of myself. Um, it is so much better to do this work together. We know it's hard. We know it's really hard to be a good mentor because of all the time and energy that it takes. We know it's really hard to run these programs, especially when the world around us and the landscape is just so um aggressively telling us that this work doesn't matter or that it's not worth funding or that equity work is not important. We need each other to kind of make the load easier by sharing tasks and by sharing resources, but also just that community aspect. Um, and then I've been really trying to think about the root causes of these challenges when we design new practices, kind of coming back to what is the goal, what is the vision, what's the mission, what are the values underlying it, and let's get to that. Sort of those same ideas of when you're working with volunteers, when you're working with mentors, when you're working with youth, just all of it coming back to the the big goals. And then finally, mentoring well is not just about the individual mentor. Most people want to be amazing mentors for the students and the young people in their lives. And if they're not, it's not usually because they tried to sabotage. It's often because they might be lacking the skills, they're not in an environment that supports it, they don't have time, all of these reasons. So if we're trying to create these cultures of mentorship, we need to look beyond the individual and actually think about that environment. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your attention and your time and your energy for all of this, and I'd be happy to take some questions.